So about 10 months ago, I went back to school. Not formal schooling, not college. I'm well past the point that I'm interested in ever doing that. But I started taking Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu classes. It's something that I've been wanting to do for a long time, and I finally, you know, decided I was in a point where I could do it responsibly, and I joined the classes, and they've been going really good. I've had a lot of fun. I've learned a lot. It's been a good experience so far. And the instructors are great. The instructors are very professional, but they're also very chill. They don't laud their authority over me or over other people. They're kind of just there to help teach the techniques and to transmit their expertise to you for money. I mean, I'm paying them, and I'm paying them so they teach me to learn these skills, and they understand that very well. And there's a couple main instructors who I have basically every day. There is one instructor who is a jiu-jitsu practitioner. He's obviously very skilled at it, or skilled enough anyway to teach someone like me. But most of the time, he doesn't train jiu-jitsu. He trains karate. He does a lot of karate lessons. And I don't know if this is true everywhere, but at least where I train, most of the people who take karate are small children. They're like 8, 9, 10. You do see older people doing it. There's certainly teenagers who do it, and there's certainly adults who do it. But I would say 80% or more of the kids, and I'll use that term correctly in this case, kids who take the class haven't gone through puberty yet. They're still kids. If we look at the jiu-jitsu classes, they don't allow prepubescent kids to take the jiu-jitsu classes. They do allow some teenagers, so there are some 13, 14, 15-year-olds. But it's mostly adults. It's mostly older professional people. And this instructor, and again, he's perfectly nice. He's a perfectly good instructor in the sense that he knows the material and he's able to teach me things, has an attitude that immediately caused immense consternation, not only on my part, but on the part of every adult who's there. Because so normally every day, the first thing we do in class, for the first 10 minutes of the class, we do review, where we find a partner and we work on techniques that we'd learned previously so that we can stay sharp on them, so that we can develop them further. And then the rest of the class, we spend learning a new technique. And a lot of times that involves, you talk with your partner. You talk with them and decide what techniques you want to work on. And if one of you is rusty and the other one has the knowledge to help them, then you talk to them about, hey, do this, do that. And so I go and I'm partnered up, and I say I've been going for about 10 months, and I've covered all the techniques that we learn in this class many times. I'm familiar with all of them enough to the point where they're muscle memory. I've had the instructors check me out, and I know what I'm doing as far as this class is concerned. And I was paired with a young lady who this was her second class. So whereas I have something like 160 hours of mat time, she has 2 hours of mat time. So we pair up, and I say, well, what do you remember? And of course, she'd only learned one technique, so we would obviously go over that technique because it's the only one she could review. And she was not doing it correctly, which is totally normal for somebody in this situation. And I started to explain what things she could change. And the instructor came and says, no talking. You're not the teacher. I'm the teacher. You don't teach. Now, he didn't say it. I'm actually saying it harsher than he did. There wasn't any kind of anger in his tone, but it was extremely demeaning. It was extremely condescending. And given that I'm paying his salary and that I've come there to learn information, and he's not doing that now, he's not teaching me anything at this point. He's basically just insulting me. And I could go on. He basically treated the entire class like this all the time, whenever he would talk, which fortunately is very infrequently. Normally, when you pair up, if there's a dozen people in the class, you kind of can pick who you want to pair up. And sometimes the instructors will do some adjustments. They tend to have people of similar body types. So if you have a 150-pound person and a 250-pound person, they'll try and pair the bigger person with another larger person, and the smaller person with another smaller person. Not all the time. Doesn't always work out. But this instructor would micromanage and tell every single person, this is who your partner is going to be, and this is what you're going to practice. And then he would say, don't talk, don't teach, don't. That's our job. That's not your job. And much more formal in terms of showing him respect and obedience and all this stuff. And whenever I've talked to other people in the class, people who have been going longer than me, new people, they've all reflected that this guy's attitude is extremely aggravating. It's extremely upsetting. Uh, well, not extremely upsetting. It's totally irritating. And if I had to deal with this every day, I guarantee I would probably just stop going to this place. I'm not going there to get patronized. I'm not paying the kind of money that I'm paying to go, and it's not cheap, to be talked down to, especially when I'm not actually being taught in the cases when he's talking down to me. But fortunately, it's only rare. I think in the 10 months that I've been going there, I think he's taught the class 3 or 4 times. That's not very often. And there's lots of other mitigating circumstances in this. He's not the main teacher. I can always leave, right? I'm not required to go to this particular school. I'm not required to go to any school. There's also the fact that if I wanted to make an issue of it, the fact that I'm paying gives me leverage that isn't otherwise the case. This place exists because of the voluntary patronage of the people who go there. And if they start pissing off the students enough to where the students start canceling or threatening to cancel, their incentive is to respect that to a point. Now, obviously, they can't give you whatever you want, and they obviously have their own lines and their own standards, but they are not going to dismiss complaints idly. So this is all just to kind of intro into the fact that imagine being in a situation where you didn't have a choice. You had to go to the school. And even though this is a teacher who is relatively nice, even though he's condescending in his tone and takes this air of authority, where you have to deal with people like him 8 hours a day, 9 hours a day, you can't leave. You can't cancel. You can't quit. You are required by law to go there. And not only that, but that your options in terms of having any kind of independence outside of the school, in terms of having work, in terms of having a job, in terms of having the ability to make decisions for yourself, are all completely negated by legal prohibitions against you. Can you imagine how much more aggravating, stressful, and just emotionally terrible the situation would be? As it is, it's just slightly annoying in my case. It's interesting, but it's just annoying. This is just an annoyance to me. But if I was forced to go there every day, and there was nothing I could really do, if their salary was completely independent of whether I want to fund them or not, then their conciliatory attitude would be much less. Their ability to be haughty and entitled would be vastly increased. Their incentive to do a good job would basically disappear. And this is all to point the analogy that this is a situation that you find yourself in when you're in school. Schools put all people who go to them into this situation. And this is, of course, we're talking about primary schools, middle school, high school, elementary school. It's less true in college because you can leave college and you're not mandated to go to college. You're not obligated to go to college. There are other problems with college, and I've done other videos about that. But my point here is that putting young adults, especially, the arguments are different if we're talking about smaller children, because smaller children are physiologically and developmentally different. Is putting somebody into a position of extreme anxiety and stress. You have somebody who is physically essentially an adult. All right, as soon as you start to go through puberty, when you're a small child, you're not physically an adult. You're not mentally an adult. You are naturally going to be predisposed to following the lead of your parents. You don't know how to take care of yourself, and your body knows that. You're not strong enough to defend yourself in the state of nature. You're not strong enough to provide for yourself in the state of the nature. You are going to hang on to your parents' coattails or whatever adult authority around you. You're not going to have the cognitive ability, by and large, to fundamentally question what you're being taught, to wonder whether this is something that's worth your time. You're just going to accept that. Once you start to go through puberty, your intellectual and physical abilities start to skyrocket. Now, this doesn't mean that the very first day that your pituitary glands start the process of change, that you are now at that instant a fully fledged adult. No, it's a process, but it begins, and it's very rapid once it begins. So a lot of people will make the claims that, well, your brain continues to develop until your mid 20s and you're not fully an adult then. And there's many problems with this argument. The one that people making it then never or almost never then assert that people should be, you know, considered minors and not legal adults until they're 25 or 24, right? If that's the argument, it's not. If they're using that as a justification for the disenfranchisement and the legal hamstringing of under 18-year-olds or under 16-year-olds or whatever rubric we're going for, then they should use it for under 25-year-olds, and yet they don't. But the broader point, though, is that the brain isn't static at any point in your life. It's always changing, and it starts to deteriorate at some point. In fact, it's deteriorating in some ways from the day that you're born. In terms of its size, in terms of the quickness of the plasticity, the ability for it to learn, it actually peaks in your teens, not in your 20s, not in your 30s. And then it's a long, slow downhill from that. The brain of an 80-year-old or a 90-year-old is about the size of a brain of a 7 or an 8-year-old. It actually maxes when you're like 13 or 14. The other logical problem is that to say that there's a difference between a 25-year-old brain and a 16 or a 17-year-old brain, granted, I'm not a neurosurgeon. I know that there are differences, but it's not enough to say there's a difference. There needs to be a distinction with a difference. You're smart enough at a point that being treated like a child is going to be very difficult for you. And that's what we're seeing with adolescents today. We have created this environment where we are treating individuals who are physically and mentally much closer to adults. If I would say that they are adults, they are young adults, but even if we want to couch it in different terms, they are much closer to adults, or they're quickly assuming the characteristics of adults much more than they are of prepubescent children. And yet we continue to treat them in a situation like they are completely incapable, completely dependent, and then we legally make them dependent. Imagine this, for instance, to kind of go off my analogy, because we get a lot of arguments. The proponents of public education, are totally insatiable in their estimation of how important public education is and how long it should last. And there are proponents right now, and there have been for some time, who say, high school shouldn't end at 12th grade. It should go to 13th grade or 14th grade. And if they were ever to get that, there's no reason to suspect they wouldn't add 15th, 16th, or 17th grade. Now, there's obviously difficulties politically in achieving any of these things, so I'm not saying this is something that's likely to happen. But imagine, if you will, that some legislators got together and there was sufficient power. They said, we need to re-educate our society. The workforce is not ready for the new economy, or whatever. Their patriotism is not sufficient, or they're being corrupted by fake news, or whatever else. There's lots of pretexts that could be plausibly used. And so we are now going to require that everybody age 30 to 38 re-attend school, a new school, adult school, high school 2.0, where you will be mandated to attend. It'll be mandatory. If you don't go, you'll be arrested. You'll have to go to the schools that we tell you to go to, or you don't get to really choose. They'll be based on geography. And you will have to take whatever curriculum we decide. So it's not like college, where you could say, I want to major in music, or I want to major in this, or I want to major in that. There'll be a curriculum that is standardized and that we impose on you. And your teachers, they won't be your employees, they'll be teachers, and they'll have whatever authority. They'll have plenary authority. You have no rights to privacy. You have no rights to fire them. You have no rights to leave them. You can complain to the administration, but they have no incentive to listen to you. And sure, some of those teachers are probably going to be smart people, and some of them are probably going to be nice people, and some of them are probably going to be hardworking people, and some of them are not. And even the ones who are, it's a waste of your goddamn time to be there. And you're going to know that. There's going to be some people like, hey, this is cool, this is great. We get maybe we get free lunches, and this is an excuse to not work. and this is wonderful, but that's going to be a minority, and the rest of the people who are going to go are going to hate it. They're going to find it. It's going to be prison. It's going to be prison, and people are going to go crazy, and some of us are going to go and get aggravated and be depressed or complain and bitch about it. And some of us are going to commit suicide, and some of us are going to come to the school one day and blow everyone's brains out because it's such a fucked up situation. Now, the thing is, that is the situation that high schoolers and probably most middle schoolers find themselves in. You get to this point, and I remember when I got to this point, when I was young, when I was in middle school, or when I was in elementary school, I just took it for granted that school was completely sacrosanct. And not only that, that whatever I was being taught, whatever the teacher was talking about, whatever the subject that I was forced to take, that this was all relevant and all important and something that I should, dedicate my level best at. Do all my homework, do all the studies, whatever. And it was maybe 7th or 8th grade, definitely by 8th grade, maybe by 7th. I think in 6th grade I was still the quintessentially good student, quote unquote, that unquestioningly accepted almost everything that I did or was put in front of me. But by 7th or 8th grade, 8th grade for sure, you start to look at it, and your brain is sophisticated enough now to ask questions and to reach answers that throw what's going on into question. Now, I wasn't against public education. That's not what I'm saying. But I would look at it like, am I really, I think this really came to me in geometry class. Am I really going to need to know all the rules about isosceles triangles and calculating the hypotenuse and all these other things? Not to say that that information isn't potentially useful. Of course it is. But potentially influential to me, I had no desire then or ever to become an architect or to become a mathematician or a geometrician. And it becomes an open question: why am I here? Why am I busting my ass, relatively speaking, to learn this information? Why am I coming to this class that I don't find interesting, that I don't care about? And there isn't really a convincing argument onto why I should. Never mind how it's being taught. There's all kinds of pedagogical questions that could be raised about that. There's many, many issues that could be raised. But was this a good use of my time? And of course, intuitively and even explicitly, I understood, and so did many other people, friends that I had at the time, understood that it wasn't. Now, there were other classes that I did enjoy and that I liked going and I thought were fun. I was always a big history buff. I was always into music. Those were classes that I could get behind. But even in classes where I could acknowledge that, like, hypothetically they might be useful, that doesn't mean the amount of time that you're dedicated to those classes makes any sense in terms of a cost-benefit analysis. And as soon as you have that epiphany, however mild you want to put it, then the dynamic of school completely changes. It becomes something that is, I enjoyed school in the sense that I had friends there and we would socialize, and there were a few classes that I did like, but most of them I didn't. Most of them was a tedious thing for me that I had to go through. And I didn't question it. I didn't question compulsory schooling. I didn't have that level of wokeness, I guess you could say. But I didn't buy into the propaganda that everything that was going on was for my benefit and unquestionably the right thing to do. And I was denied, as everyone was, the opportunity to do better things with my life and to have the freedom to choose not to go, or the freedom to maybe choose one or two classes that I thought were useful. Maybe I wanted to take a shop class, or maybe I didn't think my reading was good enough, so I take a reading class. But why would I have to go and take a health class or a home ec class or a shop class? In my case, I had to take a shop class, and it was meaningless for me, or a gym class or whatever else. These are things. I'm not saying that these are potentially or necessarily useless topics, but are they right for any given individual in any given context? And the answer is probably not for most people most of the time. And once you go through puberty and once your brain starts working, you tend to realize this. And so you get a lot of angst, you get a lot of depression, you get a lot of rebellion. And it's rebellion because the system is fucking stupid. It really if you really analyze it, the system in a lot of ways is just a job program for teachers and for administrators. Um, there's all kinds of other arguments about, it's to indoctrinate kids to be good citizens and all that. And I think there's obviously kernels of truth to that, although how well the schools implement policies like that is definitely debatable, and how much that's an explicit desire in the minds of the people there. That's also debatable. It's in the minds of some. I met some of them when I was in college who explicitly had that as a goal. That the public schools are there to mold society according to their wishes. Uh, Again, I don't know how many of them were thinking that, but at least some of them were. The ones who are paying the bills, the ones who are on the curriculum councils at the state level or at the national level are definitely thinking along those terms. But my point here is not to question all the pedagogy or the time, but to say that we are treating people, young people to be sure, who maybe don't have as much experience as the rest of us, but who are physiologically and mentally essentially us. And I've referred to this book before, Teen 2.0, Saving Our Children and Families from the Torment of Adolescence by Robert Epstein, PhD. I highly recommend this book once again. I haven't reread it or anything, but his point is that if we develop metrics that measure competence and mental ability, that the average score of a 13 to 17-year-old is, I think, 1 or 2 points lower than the average score of an 18-year-old to a 35-year-old. That there isn't really a statistical difference, even if you go all the way down to 13. He acknowledges, as I do, that if you go before puberty, that is different. There are physiological differences. The ramifications of keeping 5-year-olds in a classroom all day, and I think there are some negative ones, are going to be different and not as bad as keeping 15-year-olds in the classroom all day. And having this dog and pony show where we have to pretend like it's anything other than a waste of their time, which it primarily is for most of them. Obviously, there are some who have goals that require them to go jump through this hoop, but it still remains a hoop to jump through, and not one that's actually better in their lives. And it's extremely stressful. It's just, we are subjecting these people. I mean, there's a whole opportunity cost argument here to them and to society, right? You're keeping people who could be very productive and not just as workers, but as entrepreneurs, as philanthropists, philanthropists. All right, these people could. I mean, most of them wouldn't become entrepreneurs, but some of them would. And we're talking about millions of people, and even if 1%, that's tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands. They're legally restricted. They can't sign contracts. They can't. How much they can work and where they can work is greatly restricted. So there's opportunity cost to them. They're earning less. They're getting a later start in the job market. They're staying in an environment that is not like the rest of society. That's not really teaching them to be in the rest of society. The best way to learn about society is to be in fucking society. It's to be out there, not treated like you're a fucking child. Infantilizing somebody is not helping them get ready for being an adult. And that is essentially what schools are. The only way they could not infantilize people, it would be to allow them the autonomy to leave, which they will never do, or are not likely to do anyway. So, just imagine that if you as a 30 or 40-year-old had to go back and spend 7 more years in middle school and high school for adults, how would you feel? And now imagine there's not really any big reason why a 13 or 14-year-old won't feel the same way. Now, they understand that that's a cultural expectation, and they won't have an experience beyond that up to that point. And so in that sense, they will be more accustomed to it than you. But that doesn't make it any better for them. In some ways, it makes it worse because they haven't had any experience outside to help ground them, right? The real world is not cohorts of similarly aged people stuck in classrooms together all the time. It's a much more dynamic society where you have people of all different ages and backgrounds and who are doing different things with their lives, right? So not everyone is in school. Some people are working. Some people are going to school. Some people are, busy raising a family or being an entrepreneur or not being an entrepreneur or between jobs or vacationing or whatever. And that's the real world. It's not we're all sitting in a room pretending that we need to learn math or pretending that we need to learn quote unquote social studies. Uh, you know, not to go on a tangent on that, but Jesus, like half the social studies I took was just about how to feel emotional about the Native Americans and slavery without teaching any actual details of the history. And I do remember thinking that too. When we would be coloring, like in geography, this was in high school. In high school, we would create fake make-believe maps of make-believe countries, right? So you'd make Candyland and you would make it shaped like a candy cane and you'd color it all these pretty color. I didn't do this, but that's what we would do. And I couldn't have been the only one in class thinking, what the fuck are we doing? I had to get up at 7 a.m. or whatever, 6 a.m. and take a 2-hour bus ride to come and do this, to color? And some of the stuff I did was even dumber than that. And some of it wasn't quite as dumb. But even the stuff that wasn't quite as dumb, really? This is what I need to learn? I need to read Shakespeare? They made everyone read Romeo and Juliet. Everyone. You could even tell the teacher thought it was unbelievably banal. Really? And it's completely unnecessary. And it's not only unnecessary, it's damaging. We're damaging. We're infantilizing, emotionally traumatizing, and imposing enormous opportunity costs, not only on them, but on the rest of society. Um, this is, I think, a huge issue. We have tied up such a huge part. I don't want to say just of the labor force. That diminishes the value of 20 million people. They're not just a labor force. They're a dynamic, capable, vast part of our society that we are basically lobotomizing and preventing from contributing and from developing in the optimal way, which is to be exposed to something other than a prison institution. So, anyway, those are my thoughts on that, and I will talk to you all another time. See ya.